Okay, hello and greetings, everyone. My name is Harun Sidat, and I would like you to welcome you all to our book chat series as part of the Legacies of Learning project at the Islamic UK Centre at Cardiff University. This project is generously supported by the Jameel Education Foundation, and we are delighted that you have tuned in to our series. In this series, we talk with leading academics who are exploring the Islamic intellectual tradition and who can help us explore the potential educational implications and application of this tradition in the contemporary period. Today, I'm delighted and honored to have with me Dr. Sonja Brentjes, who is our speaker and our person that we're going to be talking to as part of our book chat. Just as an introduction, Dr. Brentjes is a historian of science in Islamicate Societies and Christian Europe. She is a visiting scholar at the Max Planck Institute for the History of Science, Berlin, and she's also a member at the Institute for Advanced Study at Princeton. Her research includes the history of the mathematical sciences, map making, institutions, cross cultural exchange of knowledge, and the involvement of the arts in the sciences. Among her many contributions and her recent publications is a book that I intensely read and benefited from, which was called Teaching and Learning the Sciences in Islamic Societies from 800 to 1700. And she was also the editor, or she was the editor for the Routledge book handbook on the sciences in Islamic societies, which provides a comprehensive. When the word comprehensive comes, I think that's an understatement. It's absolutely a wonderful book to read. It's a comprehensive survey on science in Islamic world from the 8th to the 19th century. So, Professor Brentjes, I just want to say thank you so much for being with us this afternoon.
Thank you very much, Harun, for inviting me.
And I know we've had some trouble connecting, but now we're finally connected. So let's get into the book chat. I think our readers or our viewers will be interested to know about yourself a little bit, about your background, what motivated you, what inspired you to dedicate pretty much most of your life to this important field of study.
I was born in 1951 in a town or city, better, of the German Democratic Republic called Halle. And there I grew up until I was 7, and then we moved to Berlin because my father started to work as an administrator, secretary general of the then called uh, Society for Arab GDR Friendship, something like that. I've forgotten the concrete name. So from my childhood, I'm sort of exposed to the cultures in the Middle East. My mother studied Arabic, Persian, and Turkish, but never taught me these languages to my chagrin. So I, at some point, said, okay, later I will learn them, right? This later took quite some time because my father uh, wanted me to study something sort of more profound, meaning science, medicine, technology, but not the humanities. That sounds familiar, no?
Yes.
So I studied mathematics from 69 to 73 at the Technical University in Dresden. And then, by very personal reasons, into which we don't have to go, I moved for my doctorate to Leipzig, to the Karl Marx University, where I did an additional training in history of mathematics and science. And so my German first degree, doctoral degree, because we had two, of course, was on the history of a mathematical field that emerged basically in the late 19th and most of all in the 20th century, linear programming. And once I was done with it, I had an agreement with my professor that I then could choose in which direction I would like to go with my research. And then I said, now I'm learning Arabic. Okay, this is what I did. So I did a second diploma at the university in Halle, the Martin Luther University, and I did Near Eastern Studies, Arabic and Persian. So that's basically my background. And from then on, that was from 78 to 82. I work on first history of mathematics in Arabic and Persian, and then I sort of broadened the fields of my interests and my expertise and went in all those directions that you already listed.
Thank you so much. We're going to come back to the humanities conversation maybe later on. So that's a conversation I think a lot of people will be interested in. Um, I just want to start by being conscious of our viewers. In both your books that I mentioned, both the book titles, there's the word Islamicate Societies. A lot of people may not be familiar with what this word is or what it means. Could you explain for our viewers what the word Islamicate means, just for their benefit?
Right. That's a term that was coined in the late 70s by a US historian of Islamicate societies, Marshall Hodgson, who is very much appreciated even today,
Mhm.
despite modern historians might say, oh, but that's an old book. Yeah. I, as a medieval historian, would not say it's an old book, right? It's a young book for me. And so his argument was that, of course, in the various societies that grew up in the Middle East after the Prophet Muhammad, these were multilingual, multicultural, multi-ethnic societies, and Muslims were one element there for a long time, a minority element. But even when they became a majority element, they were not the only population, not the only culture. And so Islamicate says, okay, Islam is an important component in those societies, but there are others. And this sort of breadth of these societies we want to honor by using this term. Yeah, it's not to diminish the importance of Muslims. No, quite the contrary. It's to enlarge a better understanding for how multifaceted these societies.
Thank you. I want to go to your writing, if I may, and your project, because I've benefited quite a lot, and I think our readers will once we start getting into some of the details. Um, your book, which was the one I'm talking about, which was in 2018, Teaching and Learning the Islamic Science and Islamic Societies, it's quite an extensive period that you're capturing there. Can you give our readers a summary or a sense of some of the important things that you wrote about or you found that that is useful for our viewers to be aware of? Perhaps they haven't read the book and they should read the book, but what can you summarize for our viewers in that particular book?
Right. So before I do that, I should say over the years, a number of my views on the past have changed quite
Mm.
profoundly. Yeah.
Fascinating.
So, uh,
Fascinating.
for instance, when I studied and the first years of my research as a young scholar, we all believed that after the translations of Arabic texts in the Middle Ages into Latin and local languages. There was a long period of silence with no cultural, no scholarly contact between the northern Mediterranean, the eastern and the southern Mediterranean. I have learned in the meantime that this is not the case. So that was one of the backgrounds for this book, the understanding, and that's why also Islamicate, yeah, that there were contacts. There were contacts between Christians on all parts of the Mediterranean. Jews were moving across the Mediterranean, but also Muslims were moving. Yeah, so that's one of the elements. There is another element that sort of is really at the heart of the book, namely the idea of the golden age and the decline, right? So that was a very important historiographical belief for much of the 20th century, even earlier. The golden age comes already from the 19th century, decline to some degree too. So there's this idea that there was this massive scholarly enterprise in those fields of knowledge that I represent. So the mathematical sciences, philosophy, medicine, and also what we call the occult, but also what Muslim authors and Christian authors, Jewish authors in the Middle Ages called the occult. Uh, that this flourished under the Abbasids and some later dynasties, but then it all broke down, disappeared, and there's an ongoing decline over centuries, right?
Hmm.
And by now, I do not believe in that anymore, in this sort of very simplistic manner. Of course, there was a wonderful scholarly climate in a number of cities under the Abbasids and other dynasties. This is, of course, clear. There were also really profound changes in this landscape thereafter. But it's by no means true that there was nothing after some point. Yeah, so
Hmm.
the point was already the difficulty. We never could agree
Yes.
when did the golden age stop and when did the decline begin, right?
Yes.
And so it depends also on the fields. It's quite different. It's sort of complex. It's contradictory. It does not mean that I think it's always all in progress. That's another term that we more or less abandoned to some degree. Yeah, not fully, but so it does not mean that I say all Muslim societies, all Islamicate societies, all Muslims, whatever, always did science. No, that's not the case. Yeah, there are quite a number of periods of regions where it's very difficult to show that scientific activities in my field or fields really did take place. But on the other hand, there were enough regions, enough cities, enough courts, enough schools where such activities took place until the late 19th century. And so the book, to come to the book, is basically an effort to correct this major element in our thinking about the past. And in my experience with Muslim students in different contexts, I think that's a very important point to bring home, that the sciences were always there in the Islamic world. They never disappeared.
Hmm.
What changed was their character, their social standing, their reputation, and of course, to some degree, the vivacity, if you want to say that in this manner. Yeah, so what I mean, we have hundreds of thousands of scientific manuscripts, either newly written or copied until the 19th century. Yeah, and in some other contexts, I said, and I hope your viewers will forgive me for making this kind of little joke. It's not a joke, but this little sort of looking my nose down. It's a lot of boring text. It's always the same kind of content. But
Mm.
these are school texts, right?
Yes.
So we have many, many, many school texts, which means we can really try to do a history of education, yeah, a history of education in the sciences, and that's not to be sneezed at, that's not to be underestimated. It's not everything, sure, yeah. We cannot do a history, let's say, of Nobel Prize winning research. No, that we cannot do, yeah. But a history of education we can do, and that's what my book is all about, to try to say, what kind of sources do we have available. That's not the same for every Islamicate societies. It's very different between the different regions and the different periods. But we have many, otherwise I could not have written the book. So in addition to the scientific texts themselves, the school texts, we have, of course, biographical literature, in particular for the Arabic world. There's a substantive amount of biographical dictionaries, which are primarily dedicated, of course, to the religious fields of knowledge. But you always find also people dealing with mathematics, with astrology, with astronomy, with philosophy, with medicine. They are not the majority population, but they are there. Yeah, and they deserve it to be rescued from oblivion. Yeah, and so the book says, yes, we have in major sciences that are connected with the golden age and from the golden age to antiquity, that continue to be studied, to be taught, and to be important for certain parts of society, both elite and the middle classes, let's say. Yeah. What else does the book do? Well, it introduces the major institution where this happens. And for me, and I still think that's really true, the creation of the madrasa, its opening of the doors to these disciplines, was a major cultural revolution in Islamicate societies. Yeah, you can look at these things from very different perspectives, but when you look at the madrasa from the perspective, in particular, of mathematical and medical and astral sciences, they became the second major institution for doing science education, right? And so the book explains what these madrasas are and what kind of content that they teach. The other thing what the book tries to do is, of course, in some sense, not directly, yeah, but by the material that I present, to do a social history of education and to say who are the people who contributed, who are the teachers and who are the students and from where did they come. And that's the second aspect of what I consider as a cultural revolution, namely in comparison to the golden age where the institution is almost exclusively the elite settings, so the courts and the houses of the wealthy. We get now an extension into the provinces and sometimes, yeah, down into small towns, which doesn't say that in these small towns the sciences were taught, but you get the institution widely spread, which for, let's say, something like the 13th, 14th century is impressive, in my view at least. Yeah. And you get families who send their sons to the capital or to the next major city to study there at a madrasa. And they can do it because they get some kind of a fellowship. Yeah? Maybe they have to work. This I cannot evaluate on the basis of the material that exists, but they have a place to stay in the madrasa, to sleep, they get some food, and they get some pecuniary support. That's also extremely interesting because that's not so widespread. Yeah. So in a sense, without overstating it, of course, you have here something that we call in modern terms social mobility. That's not bad. Yeah. I'm certainly no longer a person who wants to glorify the sciences in Islamicate societies, as I did when I was a young person. Yeah, now I got more sedated. But one should appreciate what is special for these institutions, right? The other thing that I try to do is really to understand how does it work. What do they teach? Do they teach what we would expect? Yeah, so we expect from our own upbringing that the institution is a primary thing, right? And that we study a discipline, yeah? So we study economics or business, yeah, or history, or mathematics. No, that's not the case, yeah? Yes, of course, the institutions are important. They are named, they get names, so they are not uh, anonymous. But what is really important is the teacher-student relationship. And that, of course, has something to do with the specifics of now a Muslim educational context. Yeah, you teach in sort of, briefly speaking, the Isnad tradition. Yeah, you need a transmitter, which may sound a little weird for mathematics, but that's the same thing. Yeah, and so you get this interesting surprising phenomenon that students go and study the same mathematical text with different teachers. Yeah, from the mathematical perspective, you say, why would you do that? You already learned everything that's possible to learn from the text. Why do you go and do the same thing again? Yeah, because you want to have these personal connections. You want to write in your margin, I studied with A, B, C. Yeah, so the text per se, the content is secondary. This shapes to some degree indeed the fate of the education, yeah? Because it's not that you are encouraged to learn more and more and more, but you are encouraged to learn with more and more and more people. Yeah, that's a real important difference. And so I started looking for other differences. What happened? Because, of course, to some degree, we still try to understand the changes in the scientific landscape of Islamicate societies over the centuries. And one other thing, at least for the Arabic Middle East, what seems to be relatively clear is that there's a shift. Uh, Difficult for me to phrase, let's say, in the uh, amount of material that students are taught and that students learn. Yeah.
Hmm.
So what I saw as a trend, I'm not saying everybody did that, yeah, but as a relatively strong trend that became stable, one studies only parts of books, and I see that in manuscripts. Yeah, one doesn't study an entire book, one studies a chapter, and then one goes on. The rationale for that, I still do not understand. Yeah, because you stay for long years at the madrasa. It's
Hmm.
not a time issue. You could have studied the entire book, but since nobody tells you why they only study chapter three, uh, I find it difficult to find the answer. Yeah, so that's something one could discuss today, whether it's still a phenomenon in Muslim education that there's a preference for partial readings of textbooks,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
So much for the book.
I just want to kind of speculate on what you've been saying right at the end about perhaps reading chapters or parts of a book. I can imagine it might be that certain books have certain strengths in certain areas, they you find in, like, at least in legal studies, uh, fiqh studies, you find that some books are more renowned for certain topics as opposed to other books, and that becomes well known over time. So students then just go to one book. Or a second reason I can imagine is that the the particular pedagogical aim is to just gain mastery of a certain chapter, and then the student should then be prepared to just read the rest of the book himself. That would be another reason, because some texts are not meant to be read, but they kind of like do the mumarasa. It's the idea of practicing, because every scholar has their own sort of way of writing. So just developing that ability to read the text. I mean, those are just my own views and speculation as to why this might have happened or why we might do that today, for example.
Right. As I say, I don't have really access because students, when they copy text in their notes in the margins, do not write about this. Yeah.
Hmm.
They make little comments on another text they read, yeah, or a teacher makes a comment in the margin. There's sometimes a prayer, but really about their motivation.
Hmm.
In most of these texts, you do not get information. And in the biographical dictionaries, you get all sorts of information of quite fundamental importance for the person, but not so much about why they studied the text, not even why they studied the text they studied. Yeah, it's just an information that they did study, right? But not why they did it. Very rarely, and then I'm of course very happy. You get a little bit about how a class went. Yeah. So, for instance, in one student memory, he reports that he always hopped up and asked a question, yeah, in class, and that sometimes the teacher was annoyed about him. Okay, great, yeah, that's nice. Or another person reports that the teacher of his teacher had made wax figures of mathematical solids, yeah, to explain to the student visually what the content of a theorem in a mathematical book was. So that's
Hmm.
nice, yeah. But it's a very rare case, yeah. So what you have to do is to collect bits and pieces and see what you can talk about and where are the gaps. And gaps, there are many.
Yeah, yeah. Um, When I was reading the book, one of the things that caught my attention as someone who has gone through a what I would call a modern madrasa system is you talk about patronage, and of course, many madrasas now don't receive patronage as they used to. Um, and to a lot of students today, this seems very odd because this was a model that worked very, very well successfully. I know you've touched upon this, but could you tell our viewers more about patronage and the importance of patronage and how it worked um, in those societies?
Yeah, I think that again has something to do, on the one hand, with the religious identity. It's not specific for Muslim societies. And now I mean really the Muslim part of the Islamicate society, because Christians and the little I know about Jewish educational context, they did that too. Yeah,
Yeah.
so they patronized educational institutions because that was part of their religious identity. Yeah,
Mhm.
they didn't patronize these institutions because they wanted to patronize mathematics. No, yeah, it was for the religious training, for the training of the, let's say, people with an interest in this kind of matter. It was not even for a long time, for many centuries, it was not for training religious functionaries. Yeah, so it was not a professional school. Yeah, I'm not certain whether it ever became a professional
Yeah.
school. Yeah, so that's one very important part. Yeah, and you know what goes with when you do a wakf. Yeah, the reputation and the good deeds and all that. So that's an important element. But on the other hand, it's also about power. Yeah, power in society, about your standing. Yeah. So, in particular, the people of the ruling families, that was an important element to convince the elite, in particular when they came from outside, so came from another context, the local elites, to convince them that they are good rulers, that they should be accepted, good in the sense that they are sort of acceptable rulers, with which one should cooperate and against whom one should not fight. Right, so that was a strategy of political power holding, of reputation within the family. Yeah, so some dynasties, you see that, for instance, the Ayyubids, you see that very clearly, that every prince with his sort of region and its capital where he ruled competed with the others. So it's competition within the family. Yeah? That makes them support madrasas, support scholars at the court and in the madrasa. That goes then hand in hand. And it's also personal, right? Men and women had personal goals with their patronage, and so decided to patronize a particular rite, yeah,
Mhm.
Hanbalis or Shafi'is or a medical school. This also happened. So medical schools indeed were occasionally specifically donated. Yeah, so that depended very much on very personal perspectives of the donor. And then you have, of course, with the madrasa, which may be one of, in both senses, yeah, an advantage and a disadvantage. Everybody could donate a madrasa who had at least a room, right, and a little sort of property to sustain it for some time. Yeah, which of course, in the sense, decentralized education. Yeah, and decentralized institutions, but also multiplied them. Yeah, that's one of the reasons, in my view, that you get this sort of spreading of the institution down to the provinces and even occasionally into a village. Yeah, so you have this patronage element to this very personal, this very individual opportunity to invest some part of your property into a good deed and do something for education. And then you have, of course, individual patronage, in the sense patronage for a person. Yeah, so you have uh, usually, of course, the center of this patronage is at the courts, from top to the lower ranking governors. But what you can see in the biographical dictionaries is that patronage at some point also becomes visible among the ulama. Yeah? So ulama patronize students in various ways, right? They patronize them by appointing them to deputies, because that begins at the latest already under the Ayyubids, but very clearly under the Mamluks, a multiplication of professorships, to call it with this modern term, of the mudarrisun. Yeah, they have not just one chair at the madrasa, but they try to collect many chairs. This also has something to do with money and reputation, but they cannot teach in all these settings, so they patronize their better students to deputize for them. And that's one form. And the other form is, of course, to marry them off to their daughters, right? To sort of develop the family that usually, often, not always, but often is already for generations and family of alims, that it continues to be a member of the, let's say, class of the ulama. Yeah. And so for that, it's good to have a bright student as your successor and as a husband of one of your daughters at the very least. Yeah. So these are different forms of patronage, and they all stabilize the system. They allow the spread of students among cities, because you visit then, of course, the friend of your father-in-law or the friend of your father. Yeah? You get recommendations, letters of recommendations, all these kinds of things that we also know from our own times. We still need letters of recommendations to get a position in academia. Yeah?
Absolutely.
So it's not so unusual. It's a tradition that kind of goes back for centuries. Yeah, what happens then? And then, of course, you get patronage after the madrasa when people decide to become mudarrisun and not build their own madrasa, but want to be at the sort of more important madrasa, get a higher salary, then you need patronage. If you want to become a religious functionary, yeah, a sadr or a kadiasker or whatever, you need patronage. Yeah, you cannot simply apply and then there's a kind of advertisement and they have a committee and they choose the best. No, no, you need to turn to the governor, or you need to turn to the sultan or to any other person who is important in decision making, right? So you have these different layers, and so you usually get then a number of people, uh, also in the disciplines I do research about, that work at courts or at madrasas as astronomers, to be modern, or within medicine. Yeah, and this is usually always with a component of patronage.
Thank you. That was a wonderful explanation. I really enjoyed the rich textured description of how patronage works in society. Um, I want to pick on something that was also in your book, and it was in your subsequent edited collection, which is the importance, especially during the 14th and 15th centuries, I think, of the occult sciences as a reflection of those changes in Central Asia, Anatolia, North Africa. And when we think about madrasa education today, these sciences are completely, I mean, non-existent. And especially when we think about the disenchanted sort of world that we live in now, um, how important were these sciences, and why were they even there? I mean, to a modern Muslim, even this seems like something really, really odd.
Yeah, that's an in my view, a difficult question.
Mhm, mhm,
On one level, because with these profound shifts in what we understand as science and
mhm,
scientific, right, and what not, these fields of trying to know the world have received a bad reputation. Yeah, so they are superstition, right? They are pseudoscience. And yes, from our position, that's kind of a correct description. They do not operate in the same manner as our sciences today operate. Yeah. But that's not very helpful for history, for historical studies, right? There you need to go and try to understand uh, what do they do in these fields of knowledge, if you don't want to call them science, right?
mhm,
uh, and why do they do that, and to whom do they talk, yeah, and where do they exist, and what do they do. And there are interesting differences, let's say, to late medieval, early modern Europe, where astrology and alchemy are very, very prominent, up to the highest level of society, uh, down to the lowest level of society. That's not exactly the case in Islamicate societies, right? So astrology is important. Then another divinatory field, the in English the geomancy, so ilm al-ramal, becomes important. It is already there in the ninth century. Some of our scientific heroes, like Thabit ibn Qurra, write on similar topics. Yeah, so that's another interesting issue, that for a long time we have sort of split too much our historical figures in the good sciences and those we do not care for, right? And so we have forgotten to some degree that these people did all these things, yeah, not only one part. And that's important to recover, yeah. Uh, that's difficult because for some, both researchers and readers, this diminishes their scientific yeah, status. And you know that, in particular, non-Western history of science is heavily contested, and it's either diminished or exaggerated. It's a matter of pride or a matter of sadness, yeah, for having lost. And there are lots of emotions connected to these topics, right? And so to go and to say out of a sudden, Thabit ibn Qurra or Nasser ad-Din Tusi or Qutbuddin Shirazi, and you can call them all, they all did these pseudosciences. That's not nice for some people, right? But it's the truth. They all did it. Yeah? Tusi wrote on astrology, and I'm not certain whether he wrote about Ramel, but Ibn Khaldun wrote about Ramel, despite the fact that he is very disparaging about all these occult sciences in the Muqaddimah. Yeah? So they are very interesting questions for a historian. I like these challenges. Yeah? So that's why I'm very much in support of having the history of the occult sciences as part of history of science. Right?
yes.
So what I see is that alchemy has lots of manuscripts in the libraries today, but I cannot see them in the madrasa.
Mhm,
There is, for me, no trace in the madrasa. Just one occasion where I know that in one Iranian madrasa there was a professor who taught alchemy. There are relationships to courts, to rulers, but they usually end badly because the alchemist either ruins his wealth, he loses everything, yeah, or he gets chopped off his head because he cannot produce the results he had promised. But it's very difficult to see where this group of people is located in society. What I can see in the very few cases that I've seen in uh, the Tarikh literature is that they are all religious scholars, yeah,
mhm,
which I find interesting. They are not, let's say, primarily physicians or so, where you would expect that in a European context often, yeah. No, no, it's very often with the very few people that I have seen mentioned, they come from the religious sciences. So why that is the case, I do not know. Yeah. Uh, what I see in the 17th century with Ottoman sources is that these occult sciences are now in the madrasa, in difference to the 14th and 15th century. At least there, quite a number of these men who are named in such a biographical dictionary are also named for all sorts of occult sciences. Yeah, so there seems to be, but I don't know when it starts, whether it's the 13th century or the 14th century. There seems to be a growing interest in magic, in divination, in all sorts of other methods to figure out what is safe, when it's good to do something, whom should you marry and whom you should not marry, what do you do when an eclipse is announced. Yeah, so there are many, many questions in daily life for which you need counseling. Yeah, uh, to be neutral, right? And so they try to develop methods for counseling. What I see in the things that I have read is that the rulers need counseling for any kind of military campaign. Yeah? And so they turn to people where they think they have the knowledge to say something, to draw inferences from some kind of science, right? Uh, in Central Asia, what I've seen, it's astrology, but colleagues say later it gets indeed uh, geomancy. And then, of course, this is what now is called lettrism, ilm al-huruf, becomes very important. And that again is a, you see, it's a mixture of religious teachings, religious beliefs, yeah, mathematics, and the interesting feature that numbers are written also in Islamicate societies, not only there, but there too, by letter symbols. Not only you can write numbers also with other symbols like the Indian symbols or like Coptic symbols. It's not the only one, but there's a very strong and widespread uh, practice of writing numbers via letters. So, and you know that's called abjad,
Hmm.
yeah?
Yes.
And so you get these two things immediately together, yeah? The writing, the word, and the numerical meaning, yeah? You use it for chronology, for dating, for instance, the Mughal padishahs. You often take abjad numbers or this kind of thing, or a verse, yeah, where you count then the numerical values of the letters to get the date. So it's not religious in this sense. It's not occult. It's one way of producing a date. But you also can use it, of course, for these other more sort of prognostic elements for linking your name to Ali, Muhammad, you name it. Yeah. So that's an, I think this overlay of different needs that are addressed explains why these techniques, these skills get more and more important. And the last thing to say on that, what is also similar, what you have in antiquity already, what you have in the early modern period in various parts of Europe, you have that here too. It's the idea that these kinds of disciplines, uh, in particular, they're more, let's say, sophisticated parts, yeah, deliver a kind of philosophy, right? They deliver to you a teaching to understand the entire universe. That does not mean that these people want to replace the teachings of Islam, yeah, but they want to have a sort of more complex explanation why the world functions as it does, why it's structured in the way. What are the forces that you cannot see? Yeah. So there's a strong belief today too, yeah, that there are all sorts of forces that you do not see, but they have an impact on your life. I mean, astrology with the forces of primarily the planets, but you have stones with hidden forces that you use for health. Yeah.
Yeah.
So there are lots of these elements that come together, and I think that all, in each case, in variation depending on the concrete society and its context where they are used, uh, explain why these occult disciplines become more and more important. That's my answer. I know that some colleagues are not agreeing with me, but that's
Mm.
what you do as an academic. You disagree.
That's right. I have a question for you. So, in your book, you talk about the emergence of the Juris physician, um, from a shift from the philosopher physician to Juris physician. And given that a lot of madrasa education is focused on juristic understanding, or fiqh, um, some people lament that one of the problems that we have in the modern age that people study fiqh but they don't study philosophy, or they don't study the natural sciences, and therefore there's a disconnect. Um, I wonder if you could speak to that today, because this is a common concern that you hear amongst people.
Right. That's also one of the fascinating changes over time, uh, which somehow I think have obscured a little bit that this is not so clear cut. Yeah,
Mm,
it doesn't happen everywhere. In particular, at least that's the argument, not mine, but of colleagues who do history of philosophy, that in Iran philosophy is much more prominent in certain periods at the madrasa, while sort of a jurist physician is basically not visible. Yeah. So we have to accept or to learn or to realize that many things we have taught in the past, believed in the past, for Islam, yeah, as the entire Islamicate world, they are simply not correct because they are too general. Yeah,
mm,
what we need to learn, and what I call to historicize these societies, we need to go down to earth and see what is characteristic for a certain period, for a certain region, right? And then understand. Yeah? So for the Indian subcontinent, to speak a little bit to what you are coming from,
mhm,
there's something that's very special for this region that never happens in the same way anywhere else, namely the engagement between two systems that are ideologically totally different. Yeah, so between Hinduism and Sunni Islam primarily. I mean, I don't know what the Shia does in southern India. Maybe they do that too. So in medicine, for instance, and a colleague of mine, Fabrizio Speziale, does really interesting research on that. Uh, both sides, the Muslim physicians and the Ayurvedic physicians, move to each other and learn from each other. It's not idealistic, yeah. It's not that everybody is happy with each other. No, no. But indeed, they learn. They take certain elements from the other system. They translate texts. Yeah. So there is a dialogue. Let's say so. Yeah. You don't have that simply because either, like the Zoroastrians, they sort of lost much of their societies. They were not engaged in these fields, or with the Christians in the Arabic Middle East. There you have it, but in a very different sense because the past is different because it already comes through a Christian medium, yeah, the medical translation. So there's not so much new, while in the Indian case, that's really new. Yeah, so that's one answer. So it's different. Yeah.
mm.
Uh, Now, do we really have jurist physicians? Yes and no. What we have are people, Mudarrisun, that either teach fiqh as their primary field of teaching, or the usul, the asline, yeah? Usul al-din wa usul al-fiqh, and then also teach medicine. Yeah, so this is what the term refers to teachers who teach religious disciplines and medicine. And that you get quite prominently. And then you get this, but I mean, it speaks to my type of humor. The nice comments by the biographer, who then says occasionally, and this person never healed a single person, and don't
Mhm.
let it touch you. Yeah.
Yeah.
While the other one, who is a great healer, may never have read a religious book in the madrasa. Yeah,
Mhm.
so it's not. See, that's the other thing. We tend to idealize things. Yeah, we have a category, and then we think everybody belongs in this class and does the same. It's very often not the case. It's very often much more variegated what people do. But yes, in general, for the Arabic Middle East, there is a trend from, let's say, late 13th century onwards, that more and more people in madrasa context uh, also teach medicine. Yeah,
Mhm.
you still have sort of classical physicians, meaning physicians that are taught at home, because you still have a number, quite substantive number of Christian and Jewish physicians in this region, and they, of course, do not go to the madrasa. Yeah, so again, Jewish physician is for Muslims, not for the others.
Mm.
And the last thing to say to that, so we thought for a long time that in the Arab world there was no philosophy. But that's also not true, because it's the physicians who study philosophy, maybe in some sort of specific manner, yeah, not as completely, let's say, as Ibn Sina, maybe, yeah, but they do study philosophical texts. That's without doubt. Yeah, we have enough manuscripts from that region that prove that. Yeah, so that's another element that I don't know why, with our fascination with the with the, no, sorry, jurist physicians, we have overlooked. Yeah, so it's not that the philosopher is still the first person in the equation. It's the
Mhm.
physician who is the first person in the equation, but it doesn't mean that the physician is not philosophically trained. Yeah, so these are all things one needs to modify. And to the modern period, well, as I said, uh, the people in my fields of knowledge are in a minority in the madrasa. Yeah? They never dominated. Yeah, so the dominance is then, like today, people who only study and teach religious sciences. Yeah, I mean, I sometimes counted the number of biographies, and it varies between 5% to 20%.
Mhm.
Uh, so it can be a qualified minority, yeah, but it's still a minority.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but yes, it would be good if jurists today had a broader education, no doubt about that.
Yes, and that brings me nicely to something that we have briefly discussed and we mentioned at the beginning, which is that though many people study Islamic studies or madrasa education, and then they come out of a madrasa education, one of the comments that you hear or lamentations that you hear is that not enough people are studying the humanities, um, and there's an increasing number of people who, for one reason or another, will go into STEM subjects, what we call science, technology, mathematics. Not that there's anything wrong with these subjects, of course, but humanities talks to broader concerns. It talks about some of the important questions that are facing humanity. Um, and I wonder if you could speak to that, because this is something that I myself, if I'm honest, critique as well of the direction sometimes our societies go in.
Yeah,
I mean, that's a phenomenon I think you can see emerging already in the 19th century with the reforms of Muslim education in different regions between North Africa, Morocco, if you want to, and India. Yeah, the focus seemed to have been primarily, as long as the madrasa is concerned, yeah, on sort of the sciences in a closer sense. And then comes technology,
Yeah.
yeah, in the 20th century. And then comes business as a next round. Yeah, so these are the cycles
Hmm.
of prominence of where you should send your kids to education and what is good to do in life and all these kinds of things. It was not fully the case in the 19th century that no history, to take one of the humanities, was included. Quite the opposite. There's a wonderful number of translations of historical books and fiction books from French, or mostly French, but also English and later other languages into Turkish or Arabic or Persian and Urdu. Yeah, so that would be something nobody studies really intensely these days, to look up. Yeah, who are the people who do that? For whom do they do that? Who is interested in that? Yeah, so that's the one part. You have a tradition of a lack of engagement with the humanities. It may well be for the subcontinent that this has something to do with the British educational policy, that one didn't want to engage with these kinds of disciplines because they were the colonial disciplines. I'm not 100% sure, yeah, but one should go back and read the important reformers, what they have to say to understand what's going on. Of course, I think today it is to the disadvantage of, and now I say Muslim societies, yeah, because your societies have become much more uniform than they used to be in the past, right? Why is that to a disadvantage? As you said, rightly so, you need humanities to try to understand your society, yeah, on different levels. I mean, history alone is not enough. You have sociology, anthropology, cultural studies. If you don't engage with them, to some degree, don't take it literal. What I'm saying now, you have a dead society. Yeah? You have a society without debate. You have a society without questions beyond the political realm, where you have questions. Maybe no debate. That's a different question. But to have a sort of serious academically fed debate and questioning of your society is an important asset. It's difficult, as we see at the moment with the destruction of Gaza in Germany, where dissent is totally forbidden in a sense, is totally oppressed, where sort of these values that I just espoused do not hold anymore, yeah? Where they are considered as dangerous and in need of destruction. But in general, that's of course true. You need the dissent, yeah? You need the critique in order to see what are the problems and what are possible ways for at least, if not solving them, that's really mostly difficult, but to find ways of compromise. Yeah, otherwise, what do you get? You get people who are uninformed, who do not understand what's going on, who come up with all sorts of answers that have no foundation in serious reflection and study. And
Hmm.
I think that's to a disadvantage of the society.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. I couldn't agree with you more. My own personal life trajectory has brought me to the same similar conclusion. And it's an uphill battle sometimes trying to convince people to study the humanities and why it's important to study the humanities. But that's a conversation to be had. We're coming to the end of our wonderful book chat. And you've done your work is important, will remain important. My question for you really is a reflection on how do you see what you've been doing and what you've been writing, what you've been talking about, how can they help education, Muslims, the world or civilization today, in terms of what you've been learning? How can we build on that? How can we bring some of that to life, perhaps, or reinvigorate some of that today?
Well, that's a tall question.
It's
And
a big,
usually I don't think in these categories, you know.
yeah.
But yes, I said that relatively early, but I want to emphasize this once more. Uh, During the 40, 50 years of my academic life, I have revised a number of my views on the past, right? So we call that historiography. And one thing that I may not have said so clearly is uh, I said it with a decline issue, is Islamicate societies were always engaged in a larger and a smaller sense with the sciences. And it's important that Muslims today uh, try to understand that. I understand that there is this complex feeling of disempowerment, of negative surprise about the dominance of the West, right? Uh, about the role of science and technology and colonialism and all that. That's of course I understand that, but that does not mean that Muslims were always superstitious or religiously confined and did not do science, and hence we do not have to teach history of science to Muslims. But we also should not teach it as a matter of glorification. Yeah. So what I'm trying to do, let let me start again with the sentence. What we did when I was after my graduate studies, when I started with Arabic and Persian history of science, what we tried to do seriously, my colleagues, my senior colleagues, and I was sort of inculcated with the same obligation, was to remedy something, to correct wrong positions, to salvage the history of science in Islamicate societies, to restore honor, if you want to. Yeah, that was good in that period, and that's why you see a number of texts written about innovation, about excellence, yeah, about great achievements, etc. It's all within this kind of desire to get rid of Eurocentrism. I mean, we are not rid of Eurocentrism, it still lives on, but there are important sort of holes that we could bore into the wall, right? At some point, I said, no longer. I don't want to do this anymore. I'm still against Eurocentrism, no question about that. But my major question for the last 20 years, if not longer, is where are these sciences in a concrete society in the past, with a Muslim dynasty, with a Muslim minority, with a Muslim majority? What did these people want from these sciences? So to appropriate the history for your own identity, yeah, and do that in a manner that may be a little bit too emotional, but that you can heal the wounds. Yeah, that you can heal the disappointment with your own past. There is no reason to be disappointed. There were
Mhm.
good things done, there were conflicts, there were bad things done. You were a normal society. The other societies are not different in this sense. Yeah, we
Mhm.
all are only human beings and we are different. So the idea, that's the other one, the idea to assume that we all have to have the same development, and if we didn't, then something wrong with us, that is not correct. Yeah, that doesn't make any sense. Yeah, that is trivial. I mean, this is not well reflected. Yeah, you see how different we are today. Why would you assume? Not you. I mean, that's a general rhetorical question. Why would one assume that this was ever different? No, we are all different. Our cultures are different. So things develop differently. What we have to do is to try to understand what's going on, yeah, and to find joy in it, but also critical positions in it. So that's one of the messages I try, in particular to Muslim students, when I try to give. Yeah, so please stop thinking at some point you were a science-less society. It's not true.
Mm.
Yeah, so that's the one thing. The other thing, when you look at what's going on in the last 2 years, I'm rather very depressed in a sense. I don't think that there's a lot of hope for the future if not some miracle is going to happen. But it's a principle that I think we need somehow to learn to apply today too to us now. Yeah, if we
Mhm.
insist on uniformity, if we insist that only one way of life is the right one, that only one political system is the right one, and that the one who has this political system has the right to force everybody else to accept this, yeah, that's not going to work. That's destructive. Yeah,
Mhm.
I may not like the other system. That's very true. I don't like many political systems that exist. Yeah, but it's not my right and it's not my duty to change it. It's in the case of the Indian subcontinent, where I'm very unhappy for what's going on.
Mhm.
It's the duty of the population there. Yeah, I don't know how to say that differently. I
Mm.
will always support any kind of colleague, yeah, who wants me to write a letter. I will do that. But to fight Hindutva is a task of the people in the subcontinent.
Mm.
Yeah. So I don't know whether I could make understandable what I think um, I would like you to see coming out of my work. Yeah, respect, appreciation, but also critical questioning.
Mhm. Thank you so much. I've just made a note of that as well. Um, I think we've spent quite a lot of time talking. We could talk for a lot longer, and hopefully we can talk again. And when we meet, our paths will cross, hopefully, and God willing, and we can talk in more detail. I just want to say thank you so much for this wonderful conversation. I've made lots of notes and I've benefited immensely, and I'm sure our viewers will. Um, and we hope that our viewers can join us for more on the Legacies of Learning project book chat, where we explore the Islamic intellectual tradition to explore how this rich legacy can help us today. Please do subscribe, please do like, please do comment and share with your colleagues. With that, I want to say once again thank you to Dr. Brentjes for giving me your time. I know you're incredibly busy and you're incredibly dedicated, but it means a lot to people like us who are young scholars, young academics, just starting off. It's spring here in the UK. I know it doesn't feel that way, but we're still in spring, so we're still sort of growing, and so we look up to yourselves to kind of inspire us, to guide us, and to show us, what is a better way of, like you said, respect, showing appreciation for scholarship, but also critical thinking in the way we do our scholarship.
Thank you very much, Haroon, for inviting me.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Bye bye.
Bye.